This is the Mahlkonig EK43s, an absolute icon of a coffee grinder, and in many respects, this grinder is probably the most outrageous grinder that I have either used or reviewed for home use. It weighs 63 pounds and it looks like a piece of shop equipment because, well, it kind of is a piece of shop equipment. If you Google this grinder, it's going to pop up on Mahlkonig's website as a shop grinder because that's how it was designed. Now, before I try and address the rather ludicrous proposition of whether or not you should put one of these in your home, there are a few things you need to understand. There is probably no grinder that is as synonymous with specialty coffee as a whole as the EK43. Now, I'm talking visually, stylistically, taste profile. The EK43 has really shaped the specialty coffee industry at large, and some people would probably even say it's shaped the coffee industry as a whole. The name EK43, it's a super pragmatic name, translates from German, I'm gonna try and get this right, Einphasenstamm Kaffee, which is single phase power, that's the first word, Einphasenstamm, Kaffee, coffee, and 43, which is the designation of the grinder. So it's a single phase coffee grinder, model number 43 in Mahlkonig's lineup. Mahlkonig started manufacturing the EK43 in its current form in about 1990, and for almost 20 years, not a lot happened with it until a very influential fellow named Scott Rayo started using one in his cafe in Montreal. Now, a couple people dropped by, was checking out what he was doing, very unconventional, and one of them was named Matthew Perger. And he used the EK43 to win the 2013 World Barista Championship. And this is a fascinating moment for the EK43, and that routine is still on YouTube. I'm gonna link it in the description. It's fascinating to go and watch, especially when you consider what was about to happen afterwards. Now, this is widely considered to kind of be the breakthrough moment for the EK43. You started to see them spread in popularity, and now you can find them in nearly any specialty cafe that you go and visit. And as a result, the kind of taste profile of modern espresso, and some people would even say coffee in general, has been dictated by this grinder. This version, the EK43s, was sent to me by Mahlkonig and is shorter than the original, but otherwise it's very similar. They retail for about $3,000 US. They got this large motor back here, this dial here that adjusts the 98mm flat burrs, which actually do the grinding. It's got almost this comically large hopper for home use up here, and this kind of catch bin, which I've not really seen a lot of these, so I assume most people either toss or lose them, and not a lot else. If you want to do single dosing, that's going to be something that you need to get separate. I'm using this hopper right here, which is from R4D Creations or Rad Creations. Mahlkonig makes one as well. It doesn't come with a cleaning brush. It doesn't have a dosing cup. That's something you would normally expect to see. Anything else is going to be separate. Now, this is an incredible grinder, even 30 years on from when it was released. And what really sets it apart is the character of the coffee that it grinds. Compared to grinders that would typically have come before it, it produces a much more what's called unimodal grind profile, meaning all of the coffee particles that are going to come out are going to be roughly the same size. Other ones would have created what's called fines, which are these really tiny little bits in with the rest of your grinds. This style of burr and grinder really was the first mainstream grinder to minimize that and go for a much more unimodal grind profile. Now, this is favorable in both filter coffee as well as espresso, but it is a very different experience than what came before. And what people learned was that you could actually push the extraction of your coffee to much higher levels while not just maintaining, but improving the flavor. And that flavor has spread around the world thanks to this grinder influencing the coffee industry at large. Now, to answer the somewhat tricky question of whether or not you should put one of these in your home, I think for most people, the answer is going to be no. But for a very select few of you, the answer might be yes. First, we need to recognize all the compromises of this grinder. Number one, it's really big. Like, if you put this in any kind of normal spot in a normal kitchen, it's gonna look very funny. You kind of need a spot for it where it's a bit of a centerpiece. You're obviously a coffee person if you're gonna have a huge piece of equipment like this in your kitchen or your coffee bar. Now, because this was primarily designed as a commercial grinder, it grinds through coffee extremely quickly, and it's designed to do so right into a bag. Now, this attachment right here where you would normally see a grind cup is actually called a bag knocker, and you're designed to slip the bag over it, slap this thing. People do this with cups, you know, they put it like this. And the problem is when you're doing that, it's flinging up all this little coffee bits into the air, which kind of settle down onto your equipment and your coffee grinder. So you need to keep it wiped down, you know, maybe a little bit more than you might need with other grinders. Now, retention is pretty low, and you can make sure that it's really low just by giving your coffee beans a little spritz or two of water before you put it in. You're gonna kind of get pretty close to a flat in out. What you put in is what you get out. But even still, if I'm making a huge change on my grind setting, I'm gonna tend to purge a couple little grams of beans through just to make sure my grinds are pristine. And one other thing about this grinder, it is really loud. You know, when you turn it on, you feel like the lights might dim around you. And while the sound of it grinding might evoke all kinds of positive associations for specialty coffee people, I don't think it's the kind of sound that most people would probably consider pleasant. Now, burr alignment also has been known to vary a little bit grinder to grinder with the EK series. This one was pretty good when I got it open and started kind of looking at it, but I was able to squeak out a little more performance with just a very small adjustment there. And the last compromise with these grinders is that since the EK43 has been released, there have been a lot more home grinders released that kind of come pretty close to approaching the same grind profile, but in a much more kind of reasonable package for home use. There's just one problem with all of those grinders. They're not EK43s. And that is kind of the crux of the problem. You know, if you're a classic car person, you want the classic car. You don't want the car that was influenced by the classic car. It doesn't matter if it guzzles gas or it's hard to get into gear or whatever. That's the car that you want in your garage. And with the EK43 and 43S, you don't just get a classic vintage model. You get a grinder that still, taste-wise, profile-wise, stands toe-to-toe with some of the best grinders out there today. So I think we should make a coffee, shouldn't we? So I've got a light roast coffee here, Gesha actually. It's clear, good separation of the flavors. It just is that iconic profile that you think when you think of modern single origin espresso. Now, to answer the question, should you buy an EK43? Well, if it's for your cafe, my answer is yes, because this grinder is a standard. For home, this is gonna get a little bit trickier. And I'm gonna say you should buy an EK43 for home if you want an EK43. And I think most of you might actually not want that. This is not a grinder that I would probably recommend to most people, but if that is you, you want to taste that history of how specialty coffee came to be what it is today. You want that iconic profile that is being used in thousands of cafes around the world. You want to feel that legacy, all those quirks included. You know, there just really isn't anything else that I can recommend if that is you. And if that is you, it might seem like there's a bit of a laundry list of things about the EK43 and the 43S, but if that's the person that you are and you want that experience in your home, all of those things, they kind of move from being frustrating to being endearing. Now, if you're not that person, this whole conversation might seem completely ludicrous to you. And if that's the case, I'd love to know why in the comments. Are you an EK43 owner? Let me know your most and your least favorite thing about it. I'd love to hear from you in the comments, and until next time, happy brewing.